So here's a quick overview of what the engine bay should look like once you've removed the engine and trans. I'll give you a look at the wires first. I'm going to climb into the engine bay here. As far as the black box in the corner, let me bring my light down so you can see a little better. The black box in the corner, you're going to be left with the round white plug. You'll have your black wire with the yellow connector, that's your ignition, and you'll have your blue wire with the yellow connector, that's the field wire. These are the three wires that get connected to the sub harness. There's other wire connections in here that we don't have to worry about. There's like in this van, there's a gray wire with the yellow plug that had nothing connected to it, so it'll still get nothing connected to it. And then you can see there's our post in the black box where later on the wires going to the alternator and the starter will get connected. And that's about it for wiring connections. This van was a tool drive, and so its old fuel line wire, I'll throw this back up in here, its old fuel line wire used to come through this hole here, and it had a plug on it that looked like that. So I merely cut the plug off. I'll pull this wire back through the hole, and then I'll remove that wire all the way back down to where it's attached to the fuel pump and just get it out of here. A few other things underneath the van in this area, you can see the coolant lines. This is a two-wheel drive van, so the coolant lines end different than, say, if you had a Synchro or if you had an older van with metal pipes, but I've labeled them, you know, with a send and a return arrow, but the pipes are already laid out that way, and they'll match up with the hoses as far as the kit and how we describe them to you in the cooling video. And then you can see there's a small hose here. This is for the heater core line. Another one over here. This is for the send and return on the heater core lines. So those are your four connections for the coolant hoses, and they should just be bare like that. There used to be like a black plastic tower piece on the other side of this wall. That's been removed. You can see the power steering lines are here. This little guy, this little piece of metal here, I like to bend back so that this sharp corner right here won't cut into the coolant hose that's in this area. So I'll put a piece of tape over that, hit it with a peening hammer, and just bend it back so that this isn't a sharp corner but a rounded edge. A few other things to point out. I've removed the fuel line already. That was going through that little plastic and metal grommet setup, and it's going to go through that hole down there in the frame where that other hose is right now. So I'll route the fuel line kind of in a stock location, but I'm not using the plastic nipple that was here in the firewall. Get rid of that, forget about it, don't use it. I'm going to replace the fuel line from the pump or the filter, whatever comes last off of the tank, run it through that hole in the frame, and then I usually zip tie it to these metal brackets here underneath, and like I'll zip tie it to this metal bracket here, and then I'll have it exit the firewall. See, there's the black box. I'll have it exit the firewall roughly in this area here, because this is about where the fuel rail is on the Z-Tech. This is an auto van, so a lot of vans will just have this single wire going to the solenoid on the starter. This one has two, so I'll hook those two back up like they were stock. You've got your brake booster line. And on a two-wheel drive, it used to come through this hole here, and it had a little white clamp and like this hose with a little rubber sleeve inside. I undo that white clamp, or I'll cut it, and then free up the hose, pull it back through this hole, and then just let it hang down by the frame rail here, because this is where it'll be when the Z-Tech is in place. What else? Now's a good time to clean up your grounds. And you know, these are all stock ground wires for your tail lighting and stuff. They were attached here, so I'll clean this up. I'll clean these up so that there's a good connection there. Let's see, we go back over to our power steering reservoir, and this bracket, if you're ever going to go with the skid plating, or you think you might want to go with the skid plating, now's a good time to remove this bracket. If you don't ever think you're going to use the skid plating, you can leave it in place, it's not in the way. But if you do want the skid plating, it will be in the way. So I'll come in, I'll just grind these welds off, I'll remove this whole bracket, and then I'll come back and just hit it with some paint so the metal doesn't rust. This is the license plate here, and this is the area where that rear torque strap bracket's going to go. This van has cruise control. The vacuum pump for it's here, and I may end up having to move this over a bit to accommodate the new bracket for the power steering reservoir. And let's see what else we want to cover while we're underneath here. Here's a good one. This is the bracket that was mounted to the side of the transmission for the automatic throttle cable setup, and these two bolts were a little difficult to get out of the trans, so I had to soak them with PB for a little bit. And then this is the actual cable here coming from the pedal up front. You can see the rubber boot is cracked and rotted, and then this little ball right here is supposed to be moving freely, but they often build up rust and crud inside, and so they can't. So rather than it pivoting on this ball, the cable actually pivots, and eventually the cable will break. So it's important to try to free this up and get it as loose as possible. Often what will happen is you may break the ball that's riveted to that, or riveted to this plate. You can see here, if I can get the light in there, that's the back side of it there, riveted. This ball may break off inside the head there. If that happens, you've got to try to figure out some kind of fix, or you may be able to get this part still from Volkswagen, but I doubt it. If you do break it, a welder could repair it for you easy enough. But the important thing here is to get this moving freely as possible, get the metal bar that was attached here off, because this is where our throttle cable for an automatic will attach to. If you're a manual, then it's a completely different throttle cable setup. But for you auto guys, this is stuff you really want to pay attention to and try to take care of now while you've got the room underneath here. This van had or has air conditioning. It's not going to get hooked up for now, so there was an air conditioning line coming through here. I just routed it out to the outside of the van behind the spring perch. I can show you that in a minute. And then the other AC line you can see coming down through there. That's where it enters the engine bay. And what I did was I just take it, I tape off the end of it so that dirt and crud doesn't get into it, and then I just loop it back and put it up in the area where the vent is. And that just keeps it out of the way, keeps it safe, and keeps it clean. And that's about it. Yeah, it's a good time to clean up the engine bay, wipe down dirt, grease that may have built up over the years. The power steering reservoir usually is covered with dirt and grease. Clean that up. This hose on the power steering reservoir is the only one you're going to remove. This upper one stays. Goes to this hose here. That's the upper one, that'll stay. This lower one though, you'll loosen this hose clamp and pull this hose off. If you want to make it a little easier, if you cut this hose right where it's on the nipple, it'll make it easier coming off of this, because this hose gets really stiff, and if you pull on it too hard you can actually break the nipple off the bottle. Then you need a new bottle. So put a split in the hose, it'll come off much easier. You don't need this hose. We replace it with that black and silver hose, the Alpha Goma hose.